Advisory. Some episodes of the 1836 podcast are not intended for all audiences, due to details that might be considered disturbing. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
On this episode of the 1836 podcast, we share the story about the day Jake Fleagle did not rob the Bank of Yellville. Ralph Fleagle was born on October 29th in 1880, and his little brother, Jake, on January 1st, 1890. The criminal journey of Jake and Ralph traced back to the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 1900s. Initially, their exploits were petty, but this was merely the prelude to a more sinister path. Jake's criminal career took a significant turn in 1916 when he was incarcerated for second-degree burglary in Oklahoma. This prison term was not only an education in crime for Jake, but also the moment his fingerprints were recorded, a detail that would later prove instrumental in his identification. By 1919, Jake had broadened his criminal horizon to bank robberies, starting with a successful heist in Haines, Oregon, where he amassed $2,500. This act of thievery was just the beginning of what would become a significant criminal spree, with the Fleagle brothers and their crew becoming implicated in nearly 60% of the bank robberies in Kansas and California during the 1920s. Their gang expanded beyond the siblings, incorporating figures like George J. Abshire, alias Bill Messick, and Howard Heavy Royston, targeting small towns and amassing a notorious reputation. Their height of criminal activity occurred on May 23, 1928, during the robbery of the First National Bank in Lamar, Colorado. The heist was meticulously orchestrated, with the use of detailed maps and multiple license plates to obscure their trail. Striking in the early afternoon, they intended to capitalize on the element of surprise. The plan, however, led to tragedy when Bank President Amos Parrish, wielding his revolver Old Betsy, engaged them. Parrish succeeded in shooting Royston but was killed in the ensuing gunfire, as was his son, John Parrish, a bank employee, who tried to summon aid. The haul from this heist included $10,664 in cash, $12,400 in Liberty bonds, and commercial paper valued at nearly $200,000, equating to approximately $3.9 million in modern currency.
As they escaped, they took hostages being E.A. Lundgren and Everett Kessinger. Lundgren was subsequently released, but tragically, Kessinger was killed by the gang. His appeals for freedom on account of his family responsibilities were ignored, cementing him as another casualty of their merciless escape tactics. In need of medical care for Royston's gunshot injury, the gang turned to Dr. William Weininger from Dighton, Kansas. They deceived Weininger by claiming a young man had suffered a grave injury from a tractor mishap. After treating Royston, fearing Dr. Weininger might unravel the connection to their crime, the gang chose to silence him permanently. Jake Fleagle ended the doctor's life with a shotgun in a remote location. In that moment, Jake unwittingly left a partial fingerprint on the car window as he verified the doctor's death. They committed another bank robbery in Haines, Oregon, taking a smaller sum, but their boldness was evident in a train robbery on the Southern Pacific Railroad near Bay Point, California in June of 1929, which yielded $17,000. Their modus operandi involved using numerous license plates to baffle law enforcement, carefully timed surprise attacks, and a readiness to resort to deadly force. These tactics made the Fleagle Gang one of the most dreaded criminal groups of the era, leaving behind a path of violence and unsolved robberies.
After perpetrating the violent Lamar bank robbery and subsequent criminal acts, the gang found themselves on the run, splitting up and each attempting to vanish into obscurity. George Abshire transported Howard Royston to Minneapolis, Minnesota, for further medical treatment, allowing the gang to operate independently in the meantime. Ralph Fleagle made his way to Kankakee, Illinois, where his capture was facilitated by careful postal surveillance in Garden City, Kansas. During an interrogation, his brother Fred revealed Ralph's letters, which led to Ralph's arrest in Kankakee without resistance when he came to collect his mail. Although Ralph initially denied involvement, he eventually agreed to turn in his accomplices in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. After his treatment in Minneapolis, Royston was later apprehended in California based on Ralph's information. George Abshire was also taken into custody in Colorado. Brought to Colorado Springs, the trio confessed to the robbery. Despite the promise made to Ralph, the jury sentenced all three to death. On the night of July 10, 1930, over 2 years after the Lamar killings, Abshire and Royston were executed at the Cannon City State Penitentiary. A week later, Ralph Fleagle met the same fate. None of them provided any leads to Jake's whereabouts. As the tale of the Fleagle Gang unfolded, the manhunt for Jake Fleagle intensified. By the time his accomplices were executed, a tip from Harry Lee Watson pointed law enforcement to the stretch of the Missouri Pacific Line from Carthage, Missouri, to Newport, Arkansas, where they believed Jake was hiding. Indeed, Jake had been living in plain sight under the name of Walter Cook in the small community of Ridgedale, which lies on the Arkansas-Missouri border. Here, he maintained a low profile along Highway 65 just north of Harrison, coexisting with a man claiming to be Lee Cook. The strategic location of Jake's Ozark hideout, adjacent to a highway yet near a dense ravine, helped with both surveillance and potential escape, with secret caches of weapons behind the walls for immediate access.
Jake claimed to neighbors that his health prevented him from working, so he quietly stayed at home raising chickens. He openly carried his Colt 45, which raised no eyebrows in the Ozark Hills. His possession of a machine gun was brushed off as a souvenir from the war. The turning point in locating Jake came through the analysis of his handwriting. His distinctive writing of the letter D in a letter begging for clemency for Ralph Fleagle drew the attention from authorities in Colorado. This discovery prompted a widespread alert across postal services in southwest Missouri and north central Arkansas. A separate letter sent by Jake to a friend in California disclosed his intention to meet in Yellville, Arkansas on October 14, 1930, hinting at another planned bank robbery at the Bank of Yellville. Law enforcement, now aware of Jake's movements, positioned detectives along the White River line from Branson, Missouri to Cotter, Arkansas. On October 13, 1930, a substantial police force from multiple agencies moved in on the Branson train depot. Jake, already in Branson, had purchased a ticket for the southbound train. When Jake attempted to board the train, the officers recognized him. As he stepped into the train's vestibule, they commanded him to surrender. Jake's instinct was to reach for his pistol, leading to an officer firing a shot at him. Although he was promptly restrained, the injury proved fatal, and he was transported to Springfield for treatment, where he died the next day. After he died, Jake's identity was verified by comparing his fingerprints to the one he left on Dr. Weininger's car, which was the beginning of a successful tactic of forensic science with conventional law enforcement.
The Fleagle Gang's influence reached far beyond their criminal deeds, becoming a part of American cultural heritage and folklore. Their exploits inspired characters in comic strips, where they were often portrayed in a more whimsical or exaggerated fashion. Carl Barks's Beagle Boys and the Donald Duck series mirrored the Fleagle brothers' bank robbery escapades, albeit with a humorous twist. Likewise, in Al Cap's Lil Abner, the character Evil Eye Fleagle, with his magical ability to whammy opponents, humorously echoed the gang's fearsome reputation. The intrigue surrounding the Fleagles doesn't end with their criminal records. They've left a legacy of rumored buried treasure that continues to fascinate both treasure hunters and historians. Stories of hidden wealth are prevalent in regions where the gang was active, from California to the Ozarks.
This case holds historical significance, as it was purportedly the first instance where the FBI utilized a single fingerprint to identify and convict a criminal, setting a precedent for forensic science and law enforcement. The mysterious figure known as Lee Cook slipped away amidst the chaos of Jake's shooting and arrest, evading capture as the train's delay provided just enough time for escape. Today, Jake and Ralph Fleagle rest at the Valley View Cemetery in Garden City, Kansas, their graves marking the end of a notorious chapter in American criminal history.